The thing about secrets is, they never stay buried. Not forever. I used to think I was living a quietly perfect life. Not glamorous, not flashy, just secure, comfortable, predictable in all the ways I thought marriage should be. My name is Emily. I'm 33, a literature professor at a mid-sized university just outside Chicago. I live in a 2-bedroom condo with my husband, Daniel. We've been married for 6 years. He's 36, a senior executive at a global investment firm, constantly flying to places like London, Singapore, and Dubai. People say we're a power couple. At least, that's what they think when they see us at fundraisers, clinking glasses of wine and smiling for photos. What they don't see is how often he's gone, how many nights I fall asleep alone, how every time I ask when we'll finally have a baby, he changes the subject. But I believed in him. I believed in us. Until that night at his company's anniversary party. We had just walked into the grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel downtown. It was all chandeliers and champagne and men in dark suits speaking the same polished language of money. I felt like a prop on Daniel's arm. Perfect dress, perfect hair, perfect smile. But out of place, like I didn't belong in his world. Daniel excused himself to speak with some board members, and I wandered toward the bar, doing my best impression of a confident wife. That's when she found me. A woman with shoulder-length blonde hair, a little tipsy, carrying a second glass of wine. She introduced herself as Hannah, one of Daniel's colleagues from the Singapore office. She seemed warm, kinda chatty. "You're Emily, right?" she said, smiling. "Dan's wife. He talks about you all the time." I smiled back. "That's nice to hear. He's always so buttoned up at work," she said with a laugh. "Except that one trip to Bangkok last month. God, I don't think I've ever seen him that relaxed." I blinked. "What trip to Bangkok?" Hannah froze. Just for a second, but I saw it. The sudden awareness that she'd said something wrong. "Oh," she said quickly. "Maybe I got the wrong month. I think I meant the one before that. Or maybe it was someone else's trip I'm thinking of." She forced a laugh and took a sip of wine. "Ignore me. I'm useless with dates." But her smile had tightened, and mine had vanished. Before I could press her, Daniel appeared beside us. His hand landed gently on Hannah's shoulder. "Can I steal you for a moment?" he said to her, his voice smooth, steady. She nodded, eyes flicking toward me. "Of course." He led her away without even looking at me. And in that moment, the ballroom felt colder, the music softer. And I just knew, that something wasn't right. I didn't know it yet. But my husband was keeping a secret, and the person who would help me uncover it had already let it slip. Have you ever overheard something that changed everything? What would you do if a total stranger knew more about your spouse than you did? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Sophia's Revenge Stories. Emily's about to uncover more than she ever imagined. I didn't sleep that night. Daniel came home late from the party, said he had to stay back and help smooth over a client issue. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask questions. I just lay there, pretending to be asleep as he slipped into bed beside me. But my mind was racing. That trip to Bangkok. He'd never mentioned it, not once. And Daniel wasn't the type to forget to share something like that. He was careful, curated, always in control. The next morning over coffee, I tested the waters. "You never told me you were in Bangkok recently," I said lightly, keeping my tone casual. Daniel didn't flinch. He stirred his coffee and smiled. "Oh?" "I wasn't. Hannah probably got me confused with someone else. We've had a bunch of teams rotating through Southeast Asia this quarter. I nodded, smiled, took another sip. But inside, I was writing it down. Later that day, while Daniel was out meeting a client, I opened his laptop. I didn't want to be the kind of wife who snooped. But I already was. That version of me had been born the moment Hannah said Bangkok. His desktop was clean. Too clean. No recent documents, no open tabs, no browsing history. Suspiciously perfect, so I checked his desk drawer, and that's where I found the envelope. It was tucked behind a stack of outdated tax forms. Inside were 3 hotel receipts: Bangkok, Singapore, and Ho Chi Minh City, dated within the last 6 months, all charged to a corporate account, all under his name. I stared at the Bangkok one. Hannah hadn't made a mistake. Daniel had lied. That night I didn't ask him anything. I just listened as he told me how exhausting his meetings were, how much he missed me while he was away, how he couldn't wait for us to start a family soon. I smiled, but I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff with no idea how far the drop was. Because now I wasn't just wondering what he was hiding. I was starting to ask myself a much scarier question. How much of our life had already been a lie? The next few days I moved like a woman rehearsing for a role she never wanted. Smiles at the right moments, soft laughs at dinner, a kiss at the door when Daniel left for work. And as soon as he was gone, I'd pull out my notebook. I started documenting everything. Travel dates, charges, patterns in his calendar, gaps in time, emails that made no sense. I even checked our shared bank account, only to realize there were dozens of transfers I had never noticed before. Small amounts, moved regularly, always to the same private account listed under his name only. I wasn't paranoid. I was finally paying attention. That Thursday, I found the second crack. Daniel had left his work phone charging on the kitchen counter while he showered. Normally it was always locked, guarded. But this time, it lit up with a text from an unsaved number. Appointment confirmed. Bring the old ID. Old ID. My heart kicked into high gear. When he left that evening for a supposed client dinner, I waited 20 minutes, then opened the safe in our bedroom closet. He'd taught me the code years ago, his parents' wedding anniversary. I doubted. He remembered that I still knew it. Inside were the usual documents: passports, insurance papers, investment statements. But there, at the very bottom, was something else. A government-issued ID card. Not under the name Daniel Carter, but David Green. Same photo, same face, different name. My hands were trembling. I sat on the edge of the bed and just stared at it. Who was he? That night I didn't sleep. Again. I sat in the dark living room with that ID in my hand, the weight of it more than plastic and ink. I thought of the Bangkok trip, the mysterious bank transfers, the text, and now, a second identity. It wasn't just infidelity anymore. This was something else, bigger, stranger, and maybe more dangerous, because I realized something chilling in that moment. If my husband had a second name, what else did he have? Another life? Another past? Or worse, another secret that could destroy mine. I didn't recognize my own reflection anymore. The woman staring back at me in the mirror that morning looked exhausted. Her eyes were dark, her mouth tight, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Maybe she had. I brushed my hair, put on mascara, lipstick, my favorite navy blazer. I still had a class to teach. Because even when your world is unraveling, the rest of life expects you to show up. That afternoon, in front of 20 bright-eyed students, I spoke about betrayal in literature. How the worst lies are often the ones closest to the heart. And while I was talking about Shakespeare and Gatsby and Victorian drama, all I could think about was Daniel or David. I couldn't even say his name anymore without questioning everything behind it. Back home, I found myself standing at the kitchen counter, staring at my wedding photo. My fingers brushed the edge of the silver frame. We looked happy. No, we looked convincing. That night, I called my best friend, Lauren. I didn't tell her everything. Just enough to test the waters. What would you do? I asked. If you found out your husband might be keeping a really big secret? There was a pause. Is it something that could hurt you? She asked carefully. I don't know, I said. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. Yes, definitely. Lauren exhaled. Then you need to find out. You deserve to know who you married. That sentence sat with me for a long time after we hung up. I deserve to know who I married. But what if I already did? What if Daniel, the man who made my coffee every morning, who kissed me on the forehead when I was tired, who told me I'd be the best mom someday, was both things? What if he was the husband I loved and the stranger I feared? That night, I dreamt I was drowning, sinking slowly through dark water, unable to scream, and Daniel was standing on the shore, watching, not helping, not moving, just watching. When I woke up, I knew. This wasn't going to fade. I couldn't unknow what I knew. I couldn't go back to pretending, so I did the thing I'd been too afraid to do. I called a private investigator, and I told her, I think my husband has a second life, and I need you to help me find it. It only took 3 days. The private investigator, her name was Marlene, was efficient, sharp, and frighteningly calm. When she called me back, her voice was steady. I've got something, she said. Are you sitting down? I was. She sent over a file, encrypted, password protected. Inside was a small collection of photos, documents, and surveillance stills, all time-stamped, all recent. The first photo nearly made me drop my phone. Daniel, standing outside an apartment building in Westridge. Not our apartment. Somewhere I'd never been. He was holding a paper bag of groceries, smiling. The next photo showed him entering the building with a little boy, no more than 5, clutching his hand. A woman met them at the door, early 40s, brunette. She bent down to hug the boy, then kissed Daniel, on the cheek. But it wasn't casual, the kind of kiss that said, "This isn't new." The report said Daniel had been to that apartment 3 times in the last month, always during business trips, always alone. Sometimes he stayed for hours. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. I called Marlene back. Who is she? I asked. Her name's Rachel Blake. She's a pediatrician, divorced. And the boy? His name is Eli. My breath caught. Is he Daniel's? There was a pause. We pulled a birth certificate. Father's name is David Green. I felt like I'd been punched. He hadn't lied about everything. He just left out the most important part. Daniel, David, had a second life, a second home, a son. And I'd been sleeping next to him for 6 years, never knowing. Later that night, I sat in our kitchen with the lights off, holding a photo of the boy, Eli. He had Daniel's eyes, same crooked smile. I tried to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. There was only silence and the sound of something breaking inside me. Not rage, Not even betrayal, just the quiet, cold realization that I was never his whole story. Maybe I never had been. Daniel came home late that night. Looked tired but relaxed, the way someone does when they think the worst is behind them. He hung up his coat, kissed me on the cheek like nothing had changed, and asked, "How was your day?" I looked at him, really looked, at the man I had married, the man I had trusted, the man who had a child with another woman, and never told me. I took a breath. "Who is Rachel?" He froze. His eyes met mine. For a moment there was nothing but silence between us. Then he blinked, slowly. "What?" "You heard me." I stood up, walked to the counter, and pulled out the file Marlene had sent me. I slid it across the table. "Her name is Rachel Blake. She lives in Westridge. You've been visiting her and her son for months." He didn't touch the folder, but his face changed, the color drained. "You hired someone to follow me?" "No," I said. "I hired someone to tell me the truth, because you wouldn't." He sat down, hands folded, voice quiet. "It's not what you think." I laughed once, a dry, humorless sound. "Then explain it. Start with why your real name is David Green." He looked like he aged 10 years in front of me. "David Green is who I was before I met you. I changed my name legally when I left New York. It was supposed to be a fresh start. I didn't think it mattered." "You didn't think I deserved to know who I married?" His jaw clenched. "I was young. There were mistakes, bad relationships, things I wanted to leave behind." "And Rachel?" I asked. "Was she one of those mistakes?" His shoulders slumped. "No," he said. "She wasn't." He rubbed his hands together like trying to warm them or distract himself. "I met her before I ever met you. It didn't last. We both knew it wouldn't. But then she got pregnant, and I panicked. I wasn't ready to be a father. I walked away." My stomach turned. "You had a son, and you left." "I came back," he said quickly, "when Eli turned 4. I started helping, quietly, financially. I visit him when I can." "And you never thought to tell me?" He looked down. "I didn't want to lose you." I took a step back. "You never gave me the chance to choose." He stood. "I was going to tell you. I swear, Emily. I've been trying to figure out how. But then the pressure to have a baby, the fertility appointments. I didn't know how to tell you I already had a child, that I'd already made this mistake." "Mistake?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "Is that what you call your son?" He opened his mouth, closed it. I could see he didn't have the words, or maybe he had too many. None of them true. I turned toward the door. "Emily," he said, taking a step forward. I stopped. "I don't know what you want me to say." "You don't have to say anything," I whispered, "because for the first time, I finally understand everything." I walked out. I stayed at a hotel for 3 nights. No calls, no texts, no questions. Daniel, David. Respected that boundary at least. Or maybe he was too consumed by his own unraveling to reach out. Either way, I needed space and silence. I spent those nights staring at the ceiling, asking myself the same question, over and over. What now? He lied. He built a second life and let me believe I was his only one. And yet, when I thought about Eli, that little boy with his eyes, I didn't feel hatred. I felt sadness, because the life I thought I had never really existed, and the version of myself I had been, trusting, loyal, naive, was gone. On the fourth morning, I went home. Daniel was there, sitting at the kitchen table, his phone beside a half-drunk cup of coffee, like he was afraid to move. When he saw me, he stood. "I'll go," he said quietly. "You can have the apartment." I didn't say anything right away. I took off my coat, set my bag down. Then I sat across from him. "There's something you should know," I said. He waited. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. The clinic results, the ones I'd been too afraid to open after our last fertility visit. I slid them across the table. "I'm pregnant." His face went blank. Then slowly, almost painfully, crumbled. He covered his mouth with both hands, eyes wide. "Emily!" "Don't," I said gently but firmly. "Don't say anything. I'm not telling you because I want a reaction. I'm telling you because I deserve to say it out loud. This is happening, with or without you." He nodded slowly, as if he understood the weight behind my words. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, he did. We talked for hours that day, about Eli, about Rachel, about who he was before me, about who I was before all this. And at the end of it, I stood up and told him the truth. "I don't hate you, but I don't trust you, and I don't know if I ever will again." He didn't fight me. He just said, "I'll do whatever it takes to be in the child's life, but I'll wait until you're ready." It was the only thing he could have said. That didn't make me want to run. Weeks passed. I moved into a small rental, cozy, quiet, mine. I kept teaching. I started therapy. I joined a prenatal yoga class with women I didn't know and didn't have to explain anything to. Rachel and I spoke once. It was strange, but also grounding. She told me Eli knew about the baby, that he was excited to be a big brother, and that she hoped one day our kids could meet. Sometimes I think about forgiveness, not for him, for me, for staying too long, for loving blindly, for needing answers so badly that I broke myself to get them. But I also think about strength because I left. I chose myself, and I chose a child who hadn't even arrived yet, but who deserved a mother who stood on truth. I don't know what happens next, but I know this. I'm not afraid of the truth anymore. Emily made the hardest choice a woman can make. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Comment 2 if you think Emily was right to walk away. Comment 7 if you believe some secrets can still be forgiven. And if this story touched something in you, please like and subscribe to Sophia's Revenge Stories. We share marriage betrayal stories that aren't just about lies, but about the courage it takes to rise after them.